Welcome to Reframed, a podcast created to educate, encourage, and inspire parents and professionals. The research is clear. Parenting a child that has a history of loss, abuse, neglect, or trauma requires parenting skills and insight to be reframed. We partner with child welfare experts to bring you evidence-based and research-driven information. Reframed host Emily Moorhead, LPC, and guests strive to make an impact on our world by creating conversations about topics that are important to you, your family, and our communities.
Hi, and welcome back to Season 2 of Reframed. We are so thankful that you're choosing to join in with us, and so thankful for our viewers taking a chance with us on Season 1. Welcome back. We're so glad to have you. I have Robyn Gobbel here today, and she is going to talk with us about grief and transitions. Robyn, tell us about yourself.
I have arrived here in Dallas from Grand Rapids, Michigan, where my family and I just recently relocated. I had, for 15 years, a private practice down in Austin, where I worked mostly exclusively with adoptive families. And just this summer, we decided we were ready for a change, and so we went up north.
Cooler weather there for sure.
Much cooler weather.
So tell me about your licensure and kind of your experience in practice. What led you even to working with adoptive families?
Yeah, so I'm a clinical social worker, and which in the state of Texas and now in the state of Michigan means I get to practice as a therapist. Mm-hmm. I, have always wanted to work with kids who have been hurt. Since I was in high school, was really drawn to wanting to work with kids who have, experienced abuse or neglect, and stumbled kind of into adoption somewhat through happenstance. Somebody offered me a contract position writing adoption home studies, and that connected me into the adoption world, which ultimately, obviously, dovetailed beautifully with what my clinical interests were. Mm-hmm. And so the homesteading gig just helps me develop connections and relationships and to realize like, oh, I love this work. This is exactly what I want to focus on.
Yeah, and I'm kind of a fangirl, so you travel and do presentations on a lot of different topics, and I saw that you were working specifically, obviously you have a lot of experience and work in the trauma field, and so recently saw that you were doing a lot of work talking with kids about, and not kids, but professionals working with kids, talking about grief and transitions. And it is such a hard topic, and when you and I connected, I was almost even nervous about like, how do we approach that? How do we talk about that? Because transitions is something that we don't want to happen for kids, right? That means we're moving them from a place that may or may have not been safe or stable, and they're going into a new home. And in adoption, that is beautiful, right? Like a loving and caring family, we are here forever. But there is so much hard about that. And so it's kind of like lifting the curtain. Yes, adoption's beautiful. Yes, this is wonderful for this child, but there's so much hard about it. And so I was really excited to get to kind of pick your brain. Where did your passion come in on bringing education to the community about that?
Well, I think because of exactly what you just said, like it feels like a scary topic, it feels overwhelming. That causes adults to like shy away from it and not talk about it. And I would do adoption home studies. I don't do them anymore, but when I did them years ago, I did a lot of adoption home studies for families who were already parenting children in their home. So they were adopting their stepchildren or their grandchildren, or they'd already been parenting, and it was really always remarkable to meet families who hadn't yet told the children that they weren't their biological parents.
Whoa.
Right. And almost without fail, I mean, every now and again I'd run across a family who would dig in their heels and just say, no, we're not telling them. In which case I would say, well, then you need to find a new home study worker, because that
ethically can't do this.
Exactly, that wasn't a home study I was willing to participate in. But almost without fail, it was actually really well-intentioned people who just had no idea what to do or say, and additionally had all their own like grief and loss like just mixed in there, especially because I was doing step-parent adoptions, grandparent adoptions. those types of adoptions.
Sure.
And so what I found was the littlest bit of information, just the tiniest bit of support, a script even, was enough to help, adoptive parents go like, okay, I think I know how to talk about this. So with talking about transitions and talking about grief, I actually find it super rewarding because it feels like a very little amount of information is typically needed for people to really shift the way they're approaching it. They feel almost desperate, like, please help me do this better. And then they get a little information and then they're, oh, okay, I feel like I can do this better. So it's actually super rewarding workshop
so it's
to teach.
Almost like a building block and an empowerment piece.
Yes.
Because I know a lot of times when I worked with adoptive families clinically, it just was that permission that this is a normal question and that you can't fix this.
Right.
That's okay, but you have to sit with them in it. Right. And it's really, like you said, just giving them those tools to be able to do that, because it's hard. We bring our own stuff to the table.
Yes, and that it's not personal, and that it's present for everyone. There's grief all around when we're talking about transitions and loss and adoption. And as a therapist, I'm working with people always on the concept of, like, we can have more than one feeling at the same time. Like, feelings are not mutually exclusive. I can be excited about something and sad about something all at the same time. They don't take away those feelings. And that's especially true in adoption-related grief, that, like, we can all have all of these feelings and they don't take away from the validity of any of them.
And I think it's for every party in adoption, right? Like, it's birth parents, it's adoptees, and it's adoptive parents, that they all, like, those can all match for that.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, for you with adoption, I think a lot of times the conversation is, like, for adoptees specifically, like, oh, that's so great that you're adopted. Oh, aren't you so lucky that these are your parents? And so we don't allow them to have those emotions. This is probably one of the only grief experiences where we, like, force an opinion on what that is. So how do we handle that?
Well, some of it's just talking about it, right? And just realizing exactly that, like, there's a little bit of, like, denying reality and forcing our own reality on somebody else when we sell them our own narrative of something like, oh, you're so lucky, or congratulations, or you got the best parents. And it's not that those things might not be true, although there's also plenty of adoption experiences in which those things actually aren't true.
Sure.
And so it's important we hold open the possibility for that also to be true. But in the best case scenarios, and everything's gone really well, and that doesn't take away from the fact that adoption only exists because, like, the worst thing ever happened, which is that we separated a parent and a child. And regardless of why we did that, I really can't think of many things, like, in life that could be worse.
That could be easier. I mean, there was circumstances that dictated a different path from them being together. And that's what's hard about adoption, is that there are so many factors. And I think sometimes people make assumptions on what those factors are. So, like, when we talked with birth parents in our last season of our podcast, people even made assumptions on, like, why they chose to plan adoption. And they were like, those weren't my circumstances, these were. But you're making an assumption on my child and on their parents and on me about, like, what our story is. Right. And that's what's hard too, is that we make those assumptions and, like, create a narrative of the overall adoption experience. Right. That's so difficult. I know with our foster care adoptions, I remember I started working in the field and I was 21 years old and I was going to save the world, like every great social worker or therapist. And so I worked as a forensic interviewer. And so we had these two little girls that came in, they disclosed horrific abuse. And we didn't know when they came in for their interview that the parent that brought them there was actually the abuser. We thought it was someone else, and it wasn't. And so, like, 21-year-old Emily is like, oh, this is gonna, like, we're gonna save these girls from this bad person, right? It's their biological mom. And so we remove the girls, we bring them upstairs into a conference room, and I'm with them alone, and mom's downstairs, and it's horrific. Like, I get tears in my eyes just remembering the sounds. Like, it was traumatic. And those girls fought like hell to try to get back with mom. Yeah. They wanted to run, they wanted to fight, like someone threw a chair in the room I was in, like it was hardcore. And I remember sitting there at 21 years old thinking, but I'm helping you. we're going to keep you safe. Like, look at all the great things that we're doing for you right now.
Right.
And they did need to be safe, and they did not need to go home with mom. Something really bad happened. But I remember when I went home that night, I just thought that didn't feel good. And that wasn't the savior complex that I thought was going to happen. So when we have to remove a child because something happened or a parent isn't able to provide the best care for them, what's the best way to handle those circumstances? I know we have to get rid of that savior mentality because that's exactly what my problem was.
Well, we have to be aware of those experiences, which it sounds like this experience caused you to be aware of that kind of inner part. So we don't want to be like shame those or be embarrassed of those. I mean, helpers become helpers because they want to help other people.
Yeah.
Like that's just what we do. Yeah. And we're also talking about people's lives and like devastating, awful parts of their lives. And so really, like the most important thing to do is to just be aware of exactly what you just said. Like some children really do need to be kept safe from biological parents, and it's our job to keep them safe and find a safe place for them to live. That has nothing to do with their feelings about it, and that some kids might feel some relief, but those are their parents. I mean, in most circumstances, children's experiences with even abusive biological parents aren't all bad, right? Like every single experience for their whole life has been bad.
Sure, like there was a situation or there was the cycle, but not always.
Right. You know, so on top of the experiences of abuse, almost all kids have experiences that have positive feelings associated with them as well. And then it's like everything they've ever known. How terrifying, right? You know, and as moms, you know, it's easy sometimes to go to like, whoa, like what would happen if this happened to my kid? Like somebody shows up and says, you're never going home. Like he would lose his mind, right? It would be so terrifying. Where are we going? Who are these people? Like the people who loved me were not so, you know, spectacular taking care of me. So what's to say that these new people are going to be any better?
Mom and dad don't mean safety always.
No. So why would these strangers mean safety? And just the overwhelming, horrible, terrifying experience that is. So I really think for the most part, it's just as the helpers in the field, and then the, you know, parents that are involved too, the caregivers, really just being willing to sit with both of those truths, that I have to do this thing that's devastating to this child. And oftentimes when we minimize that or we fall into the kind of quote unquote savior complex or whatever, it's because we're minimizing our own ability to be with those really hard feelings, which is like, I'm causing this trauma for these kids. Right?
And it's so uncomfortable. And so you just want to move to like, oh, look what I'm doing instead of what it actually was, which was traumatic and scary for everyone in that building. So I guess I wonder, so we allow them to have both. How do we explain it to kids? Because that's kind of putting a label on a situation almost, even though we actually know. So for my example specifically, like it was not safe for you to go home.
Right.
Is that appropriate for me to say to like, I don't know, let's make up an age, 7 and 9-year-old girls, you know? So how do we handle that? How do we make those decisions?
Well, this is probably the number one thing people ask me is how do I talk to kids about this stuff? And what I first say is you're not telling them anything they don't know. So relieve that burden that you're like words that you use, if they're accurate, all they're doing is describing something that they've lived for years and years and years. So a kid may absolutely deny to their, you know, last breath that it was safe and they want to go home. But there's also a part of them that knows, even if they're not willing to verbalize or articulate it, that it wasn't safe. Because if a situation is so unsafe, we're really removing children at that level of emergency. You know, there is a part of them that knows that it wasn't safe. And so to just label it and the specific words vary a lot by age. You know, like what I would say to a 3-year-old and what I would say to a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old are pretty different. But my rules of thumb in general are be completely age appropriately honest. And so a 3-year-old, it might be honest to say, it wasn't safe, and we're going to try to find, caregivers who will keep your body safe, or keep you safe, or make sure your tummy is always full. And I also think it's good to be as specific as possible. Okay. Keep you safe is a pretty, what does that really mean? Yeah. So, if there's a child's being removed out of, extreme neglect, something like, we want to make sure that you get to live in a home where your tummy always gets to be full, and you get to sleep in a clean bed, or something like that. Yeah. But as kids get older, we just got to talk to them frankly. Again, they were there. They know what happened. Sure. So let's just
It's almost disrespectful not to address what the truth was. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so if we have to make these tough decisions and have these tough conversations, I know a lot of times, our families who are adopting are receiving a case file. I mean, it's bigger than this. A family had a few boxes the other day, and it's awful. And it's all the hard things that your child experienced. But we have this child, we're mom and dad forever. We are going to keep your tummy full. We are going to give you a clean bed to sleep in. But you miss mom, who did 3 boxes worth of this to you. How do our parents know that and know this, and how do they integrate that into parenting?
Well, I think the first thing we need is professionals to prep them for this reality. This is going to happen, and you're going to have a lot of feelings, and you are going to feel angry, and you're going to feel mad, and you're going to feel horrified that your child misses them. Those are normal feelings. Yeah. And your child's going to be having totally different feelings. And so our job is to make sure that you're there to support your kid through their feelings. And there's other adults in your life where you can go with your feelings. So I really think foster parents, adoptive parents need lots of front loading about what to expect, and that they are going to have really intense feelings. And I've worked with countless adults, and that there's almost this moment where their child's story becomes their child's story, and not just a child's story. Yeah. And there's this shift in how it feels.
Can you explain the difference?
That's my kid.
Is it the protectiveness?
Yeah. Okay. It was this is a kid who's coming to stay at my house, and I like kids, so I feel protective of this kid. Okay. And then there's this moment in your parenting journey where that sort of switches to oh, this is my kid.
They did that to my baby.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's normal and appropriate, and we really want parents to feel that way. Yeah. Exactly. We have to prep them for it so they're not blindsided by it, overwhelmed by it, ashamed of it, and that they take it to the right people. Right? And that we show them who those people are, and so we're very explicit. This is a feeling that's going to come up for you. I want you to call me. Or here's that adoptive parent support group. That's going to be a great, you should get in touch with them before then, but if you don't, that's going to be the perfect time to get in touch with them, that they know where to go, and that they know that it's normal. Okay. And they know what to do instead. And stressed out people need really clear instructions on what to do. Yeah. Right? We can't assume that their instinct will take over, or they'll know just how to manage a hard situation. Because when we're stressed out, we don't know how to handle hard situations. And so if I'm overwhelmed and I'm flooded with grief or anger, I need to be told pretty explicitly. And so this is what you do when you're feeling, raging anger at this person who hurt your baby, and your baby's crying about how much they miss their mommy or their daddy and they want to go home. So what you do then is, if you can control your rage or your anger, then you go and you rock your baby or your kiddo, and of course you miss your mommy. It makes so much sense to me why you miss your mommy. And you give all these validating statements, and then you take your anger and you go and you talk to your partner or your spouse, or you call your best friend who's also a foster parent, or you call me, or that they're really clear about what to do with those feelings.
So you're not making their experience yours. Right. So that was hard to hear. I need to process that this was hard to hear, but you're not projecting on your child in that moment. Right. Those are 2 separate experiences. Okay. Yeah. And when I think for adoptees, sometimes they don't remember the grief or the traumatic experience, and they just have this lingering cloud of grief of missing pieces to their story, and maybe their parents couldn't answer that, or maybe couldn't even empathize with them, right? They didn't get that training, they didn't get that experience. So as they go into adulthood, things just feel sometimes confusing. So what guidance do you have as they kind of sort out maybe what pieces were missing or what lack of support was there?
Advice for the adopted person?
Yeah.
Like in so many things, like find places that accurately reflect your experience. And that's easier and easier to do now with, like, it's easy to pick up a book and read about an adopted person's experience with grief and loss. You know, it's getting easier to find an adoption competent professional. It's getting easy to find a group on social media comprised of, you know, adopted people. Like, find people who are further along in the journey and can put into words their experience, because it starts to kind of organize what's happening and can allow you to go like, oh, that's what I've been feeling, or like, oh yeah, that makes sense, or like, no, I don't really resonate with that part, but I do resonate with that part.
That's helpful to know, because I know that as we get calls from adoptees who are starting like their own families, there's pieces that just start fitting that feel different. So a lot of times I would get calls from people right before they got married or before they had a kiddo. Yeah. Or they, you know, had that delivery room experience and they really were reflective to their birth parent and what really had empathy and grief, you know, for that experience. And so as that brain tries to sort it and figure out where that all lives.
Well, I think the most important thing to do, especially if you're the person fielding, like literally answering the telephone, is that makes so much sense to me. I've had other adopted people tell me the same thing. Like, there's literature that talks about these major developmental milestones that kick up grief, and getting married, having your own baby, like those are common times for adopted people to feel the grief of adoption again. And so a lot of times people just need to hear that, like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. This is totally normal. It will pass, just like grief always does, right? Like, it never goes away, but it gets, I had a mentor once tell me it gets stored in a different place in the body, and it kind of moves further away, and then all of a sudden it's back again, and then it kind of goes further away, and then, you know, and reminding people that will happen again with this experience. But this developmental thing that they're doing, getting married, having a baby, empty nesting, like those are all really common experiences to kick up adopted related grief.
So what does that look like for children? So like for adults, we hopefully typically have words or like someone in our life that's like, hey, you're having a thing happen right now. But like for kiddos, they don't have the words or even the body recognition to know I feel anxious or scared or lonely, or I'm scared my tummy won't feel full at your house, or you say, Mom, that doesn't feel safe. So like, how do we look at our children that we are parenting or fostering and say, do we label a behavior? Do we watch it? How do we follow that?
Well, we will start with lots of curiosity, especially if it's a new child in our house that we're watching. And we want to start building like feelings vocabulary just in general. We want to start building sensation vocabulary just in general. Because a lot of kids who have been through, you know, trauma and loss, they don't know feelings words. They don't know how they feel. They don't know the sensations that are in their body. And so before we start to label really intense feelings, like, you know, you're angry at me because you can't go home to your birth mom, we want to make sure that they have like feelings vocabulary kind of in the first place. So we want to be deliberate about
so they understand what anger means when we're saying that.
Right.
Okay.
Right. We don't want to like jump into the deepest edge of the pool.
Yeah.
We want to
You're
kind
disappointed.
of scaffold
Yeah.
that. We want to scaffold that a little bit, or teach about anger, but maybe not, you know, all of a sudden diving into you're angry at me because of, unless it's really obvious. Like we do want to, of course, give kids as much narrative as possible, but we want to, you know, build the scaffolding so that we can talk about that stuff in ways that they understand.
Okay. Is there any other tips that maybe you would share with like teachers or counselors as they help families adjust to those new transitions?
I mean, my biggest tip is really to like, we have to do our own work related to feelings of grief and loss so that we aren't afraid of kids' feelings of grief and loss. And to make sure that we don't pathologize normal expressions of grief, that kids are unhappy about their situations, and they have every right to be. Every right to be very unhappy. They have every right to miss these people. They have every right to be angry. They have every right for those feelings to come out in quote unquote bad behaviors. And a lot of times the adults involved see the bad behaviors and we start to panic, and we're like, oh, this means that these visits are bad for them, or we should cut off contact, or we should restrict this, or we should restrict that. And I'm open to that being true, right? Sure. Sometimes visits aren't in kids' best interest. Sometimes contact's not in their best interest. But most of the time what it is the adults need to increase their tolerance for the uncomfortable feelings and for their own uncomfortable feelings and for their kids. And to just be with like, yeah, this is terrible. And this kid has every right to feel this way. And frankly, their behavior makes complete sense. My job is to figure out how I can create enough space to tolerate this expression of grief, not like manipulate the environment or the visits or the contact, so that we all feel a little bit more comfortable because there's not as much grief leaking out.
So if we learn to tolerate it, are we able to see it clearer? Is that kind of what you're saying? Like, if I'm able to tolerate the space of emotion that they're experiencing, then I'm not going to go straight to like, no, we have to cut this off, we have to stop. Like, it stops my internal crisis.
Right.
Okay. Right. So I stop responding to theirs with my internal. Right. Okay, that makes sense.
And then eventually maybe you do get some data that says like visits really are not in this kid's best interest, but we've made that decision truly for the child and not for ourselves because we were uncomfortable with their expression of feelings.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's one of the biggest pieces that you would share to like new social workers, new counselors in the field who are making these really scary big decisions about removals and placements and the right families? Like, these transitions are hard, and making mistakes in this window is really scary.
Yeah, no, I know. I've been a child welfare worker too a long time ago, and the responsibility is like, if you really sit and think about the responsibility of being a child welfare worker, it's just overwhelming.
Absolutely.
Right? That as a 21-year-old, I was 24 years old, I was making these decisions that were impacting enormous numbers of people for the rest of their lives. And what was especially hard about that for me is I was doing it with basically zero support. And so, in addition to everything else we've talked about, like growing our, tolerance for uncomfortable feelings, being comfortable with the both and of feelings, like we can have two different contradictory feelings at the same time, like basic adoption competency and education, like we need to do all those things, but then we really need to increase the support and the systems that our workers on the front line are getting.
So Robyn, at Gladney, we receive case files when we're doing adoptions through foster care. It's it's placement. It's not foster to adopt. So it's the child's coming into your home and you're adopting them. And so we see that before they've come to this forever family, which is what we call them, that they've been moved about 8 times, sometimes 20, sometimes 4. But I mean, doesn't matter. One time is traumatic enough. How do we prepare these children before they're even moved? So I know we talked like we need to educate our families, but how do we take care of these kiddos during that time frame?
The absolute most important thing we can do is just slow down. And when I teach about this, I acknowledge that sometimes we don't have the luxury of slowing, like literally slowing something down. Like sometimes foster parents call and say, you need to come get this kid right now. Or I don't want this kid to come home after school. And so like come and get their stuff, pick them up from school, and they're never coming back here again. So barring an emergency like that, we need to slow the transition period down. Again, as adults, we watch kids' behaviors amp up. We watch, old behaviors that have gotten better kind of resurface. We watch all these things happen that are very uncomfortable to us and indicate that the kid is feeling very uncomfortable. And then what we instinctually do is speed everything up. And actually what we need to do is the opposite, is to allow for time and space. And we need to allow a child to experience the information that, they're about to transition again. We need to figure out what sort of rituals or things can be done to create some closure. I mean, it's not just the foster family that's being lost. It's everything about the foster family. It might be the pets in the foster family. It's the next door neighbors. It's the kids that they knew at school in that neighborhood. It's the kids in the youth group that they went to with that particular foster family. Like, there's infinite amount of losses every single time we transition these kids. And so if we can increase our support for their family, because it's a very difficult time to be the foster family, right? So we have to like really, really support them through this, you know, so that they can support the kids. That they're the kids' people. Like the people we want to support the kids are them, if possible. Again, assuming we're not talking about some sort of crisis, get these kids out right now, sort of a situation. We want to give kids as much information about where they're going as possible, right? Like, you know, can we do visits? Can we at least show pictures? You know, like all of us are walking around with cameras in our back pockets these days, right? Can we, you know, if it is a situation of like they're going to this new home today, you know, can the new home text a picture of the family dog and the bedroom and what the front yard looks like? And you know, there's just, with technology at our fingertips, there's so many ways that we can really quiet the fear centers in the brain as much as possible by giving as much concrete information about what's about to happen next.
I mean, I'm an adult. I feel like I have somewhat healthy coping mechanisms. And if you put me in a car and just said you were going to drop me off somewhere, that's not going to go well.
I would like kick the door out, right? And be like, what are you talking about?
Yes. And I think we have the expectation that they're going to handle this well, or and it doesn't work like that.
And just because we have good intentions doesn't mean that this child doesn't feel like they're being kidnapped.
Right.
That like both can be true. And so to give as much information as possible. And then when we can't literally slow down, my recommendation is still like slow down, like slow ourselves down. Make sure that like if you have to pick up a kid from school and it's, buddy, I'm so sorry, but I have your suitcase in the car and you're not ever going back to that house, that your cell phone is also back in the car, that you have taken a moment to feel how awful this feels to you, because this is like the most terrible thing ever to do. And when we don't acknowledge that in ourselves, we go about it like it's just normal, like it's just this rote thing that we do, and that causes us not to be present and available for this, like the worst day of this child's life. So just slow our nervous systems down and just be present.
I wonder, I'm going back and like, please tell me, but there were times where we would remove children and it would be that like kicking, screaming, like survival mode. And there were times where they would like wave at mom getting in the cop car. And I remember getting to this point where I was like, I can't project how this is going to go. And so I love that you're like, put your cell phone up and just be with what it is. And it is hard and it is bad, because it is also really bad and hard that kid just waved at mom. Like that's not cool either.
Bad too, right? Right. It's maybe less messy.
It's a lot less messy. We all feel a little bit calmer, but that actually should cause some more internal. And so it's almost just being with what it is. And that's hard for us. And it's really hard when we put that expectation on kids.
And maybe just saying like, this is so hard. I'm really sorry that this is happening.
Robyn, I thank you so much for this conversation. It's not one that you're like, ooh, glossy, grief and transitions.
No, it's not a super sexy conversation, but it's so, so important. So I'm really glad y'all are prioritizing it and brought me here. And
we're so glad to have you. So tell our viewers how they can stay in contact with you. And I know that you have some training opportunities that I'd love for you to share with families, and maybe any resources that you recommend.
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find online. So I blog, which you can find through my website, which is just my last name, gobbelcounseling.com. I'm pretty active right now on my Facebook page. Again, you can just like go to Facebook and Google, put my name in, you'll find me. Pretty active right now on Instagram, so I'm pretty easy to find. And I regularly do online trainings for both therapists and for adoptive parents. So especially my ones that are geared more towards adoptive parents, I try to make those extremely accessible extremely affordable. And so I tend to do those right about once a month, but I also archive them and put them up on my website, and people can go back and look at old ones that I did.
Your trainings are not boring. They're super fun and engaging. I have attended as a parent/professional, and it's been really helpful and fun. So I really recommend it to our viewers. What about resources, books, any kind of recommendations for our parents or professionals in the field?
Yeah, so for transitions in particular, there's a great, although it's not super new, book by Deborah Gray called Nurturing Adoptions. Yeah. And she does a really good job talking about transitions and like really getting to the nitty gritty of transitions, like timelines based on the kid's age. So I think that's a really important book for professionals and parents. And there's a couple really good kids books. There's a really great, it's a little book, thin book published by A Child Song, is an organization out of Canada. And I think it's just called Transitions. Okay. But I'll get you all the like names of all of these, and maybe you can
we'll put it in our show notes.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Well, thank you so much, Robyn, for the work that you're doing and for this really great conversation.
You guys too. Thanks, Emily.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys for tuning in. Check out our show notes to have access to Robyn's social media networks and website and trainings, as well as resources that she mentioned today in our conversation. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks for listening to Reframed. Visit gladneyuniversity.org to access the show notes and learn about upcoming trainings at Gladney University. We'd love your feedback, so please rate, review, and subscribe. Until next time.